Hello and welcome to this episode of Macro Sutra. I'm TCA Sharad Raghavan, Deputy Editor at ThePrint. And now, just a few days ago, the government came out with a data release. It's called the First Advanced Estimates of GDP for 2024-25. That's this current financial year. So, now what is this First Advanced Estimates? Are these numbers actually important? Why are they important? And what do they say about the future? To discuss all of that, we have with you Radhika Pandey, Associate Professor at NIPFP. Thank you so much, Radhika, for joining us.
Thank you, Sharad.
So, now, Radhika, as I asked in the beginning, what are these advanced estimates and are they important? Why are they important?
So they are advanced estimates because they are not based on the full year data because we haven't completed the full year yet.
Right.
These estimates are based on 7 to 8 months of data, but they are important because the budget requires some estimate of the growth for this current year, so that can form the basis for framing the projections for the next financial year.
Right.
So now we have on 1st of February the budget for FY26, that is 2025-26. So we do need some assessment of growth rate for the current financial year, so that can form the basis for projecting the nominal GDP growth for the next year, and also the various tax to GDP ratios, expenditure, the fiscal deficit, revenue deficit, primary deficit. So we do need a GDP estimate, and this GDP estimate comes from the first advance estimate. It forms the base for the next financial year's nominal GDP projection. That is number one. Second, also we have the monetary policy review coming up, and there also they need, because the RBI's MPC had revised downwards its growth for the current year to 6.6, and now we have the full year actual advance estimate, but it is the data from the official source which is at 6.4%. So it helps them in reconsidering their whether they should go in for an interest rate cut, because now we have a number for growth for the full financial year, whether there are these growth inflation trade-offs, and also it serves as a guidepost on the growth conditions for the economy, and what interest rate decisions the monetary policy committee needs to take.
Right. So, okay. So that's why these first advanced estimates
Are
are
important,
important.
right?
Um, Now that we know that, what are the numbers saying? You mentioned that it's predicting 6.4% growth.
Yes, so it's projecting that for the current financial year, the GDP is expected to grow at 6.4%. It's a sharp dip from the previous year when GDP grew at 8.2%. So now
Right.
it's growing at 6.4%. Even the gross value added is projected to grow at 6.4%. So that's the overall number. There are some hits, there are some misses, there are some concerns, and there are some sectors that are showing a robust growth. So we can talk about those.
Of course, and this 6.4%, it would be, if it comes out to be true, it would be the slowest since the pandemic, right?
Yes, it will be the slowest since the pandemic. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and we had a sharp drop in the GDP number for the second quarter at 5.4%. So it was expected that the overall GDP numbers would be lower, and after the second quarter there were a spate of downward revisions in growth. So it was expected around this number 6.4, 6.5, and it's on expected lines.
Okay. And okay, so now let's look at sectorally what the numbers are saying this year is going to look like. So, how are the manufacturing and construction sectors looking? And why I ask about these two is because, from a policy point of view, manufacturing is a big deal for the
Right.
government, and construction so far, at least until Q2, was doing very well. It was growing very fast. So,
Right.
what is the prediction for these two sectors for the year?
So particularly for manufacturing sector, there's a sharp decline as compared to the previous year. So previous year manufacturing sector grew at 9.9. Now it's expected to grow at 5.3%. So it's
Okay.
a sharp decline, and this assumes that the second half of the year will grow. The manufacturing sector will grow at 6.1%. So again, it's a optimistic number, and there are various reasons for the decline, or the sharp dip in the manufacturing sector growth. One is the uneven consumption, also the subdued exports, and a very big factor is the Chinese economy, how Chinese economy the slump in China, the export deflation in China is impacting the manufacturing sector. So
Right.
that's very important. Particularly within the manufacturing sector, we must be very clear that metals are a very strong part of the overall manufacturing sector profile in India.
Okay.
So anything that impacts metals and metal products will have a bearing on the manufacturing sector performance. And metals are driven by what is happening in China, both from the import perspective as well as from export perspective. We are seeing that there are instances of cheap imports of steel coming in from China,
Absolutely.
which is damaging the prospects of Indian steel industry. And
And
there
this
are
is something they've been asking the finance ministry
the
to
two
raise import tariffs, and
exactly
hopefully, I mean, they're saying that the budget hopefully will
will
have
have
some measures like
yes.
this.
So that is about this steel industry. And also we export to China directly as well as indirectly a lot of raw materials. Okay, for example, we export iron ore, we export building materials. It may not show up in the trade data directly, but we export to other countries, and then the other countries do some value addition, and then they export to China.
Right.
So this slump in China, which could get further impacted with the recent uptick in the HMPV cases, could lead to further slowdown, and that could have an impact on manufacturing sector. So how the manufacturing sector will perform in the coming months will depend a great deal on how events unfold in China. So that is very important to consider, that things, though on the one side the positive side is that there is some improvement in consumer demand in the third quarter that should support manufacturing sector. But on the other side, the how internationally things unfold, what happens to tariffs, all these things will have a bearing on manufacturing sector. So the trajectory going forward is uncertain based on these factors.
Okay, and it is a concern about the construction sector as well, right?
Yes, construction sector we know is was showing robust growth till now. In fact, in double digits, and a part of it, in fact, a large part of the increase in construction was due to the government's capex push. And we saw that in the first quarter it was understandable because of election-related restriction, but we didn't see capex picking up in a very significant manner even in Q2.
Right.
And even for the April to November data that we have, we know that the central government capex has declined by 12%. And a major part of this decline is seen in the road sector. So all these things have a bearing on construction
Of
sector.
course.
So there is a almost 16% decline in capex in roads and highways, which is almost 25% of the overall capital expenditure. So these factors seem to be having a bearing on construction, which has seen a marginal dip as compared to the last financial year.
Okay, so those are some worrying numbers.
Worrying numbers.
But the agriculture sector, the data shows that the agriculture sector has been doing decently well.
Yes, and that was expected because we had good monsoon, we have uh, strong reservoir levels, and we are seeing that we had a record kharif output. Even rabi sowing has been robust. So all these factors have resulted in agri growth showing a robust growth of 3.8% as compared to 1.4%. So, and even in this year, we expect by FY26 we should see agriculture sustaining its growth momentum, because earlier, the early estimates do suggest that rainfall is going to be decent in this year as well.
Okay, and now the last segment of the economy, as far as these sectors go, is services. Now,
Services.
in general, we feel that services tends to do well. It does
Right.
better than manufacturing. So, does the
Right.
data kind of confirm that, or is
So
that also going to slow?
it shows a mixed picture. Overall, services have seen only a marginal dip from, it's around 7.2% overall. But there is the big segment, the trade, hotel, transport, and communication has shown a decline. But what has shown an increase is the public administration defense sector that has
Right.
shown an increase to 9.1% as compared to so that's an increase as compared to the previous year. And it's not clear what has resulted in this increase in this particular segment. One thing that we can think of is the dearness allowance was increased. So basically, when the revenue expenditure increases, that shows up as higher GVA for this sector.
For this, I see.
Yeah,
Public administration
public
and yeah, right.
administration sector. Finance sector has remained stable, but the trade, hotel, transport, communication has shown a decline as compared to the previous year.
And that's also that's a worrying sign because all of that has to do with the consumption expenditure
Consumption,
of people.
demand, yes. So
Yeah.
that, these are all interlinked pieces. When the demand is
Mm.
subdued, it will have a bearing on these sectors which are sensitive to the demand patterns in the economy.
Right. So then let's look at consumption in a little more detail. On the
Right,
expenditure side, we have the private final consumption expenditure.
correct.
How is that number fared?
So private final consumption expenditure has done better in terms of the data. It shows an increase to 7.3% for the full financial year, and it's expected to grow at 7.8% in the second half.
Mm.
Now we need to see what is causing this increase, and
Right.
there is a very visible change in the nature and profile of consumption spending that is happening. Rural consumption is doing quite well, and we've talked about this earlier in terms of the conventional indicators like scooter, two-wheeler sales, tractor sales, but even the recent household consumption expenditure survey findings
Right.
tend to confirm the fact that rural consumption has been holding up and it's showing a steady growth. In terms of two main findings, one is that rural consumption is growing at a faster pace as compared to urban consumption
Mm.
as per the 23-24 findings, the year 23-24. It has grown at rural consumption has grown at 9.2% as compared to urban consumption, which has grown at 8.3%, and also that the urban rural consumption gap is narrowing. It's still substantial, but
Right.
it is narrowing, and a large part of it has to do with the kind of income support program that have been provided to the rural households. So there is a shift from only providing subsidies to providing direct cash transfers
Yeah.
to woo the households, and a lot of state governments are doing that. So that is all getting reflected in the consumption patterns of rural households, not only in terms of the absolute numbers, but also if we look in terms of the composition, that the share of cereal is consistently going down. They are consuming more of processed food and so on, and non-food
Or
consumption
at least spending
expenditure,
more on those.
spending more on those, and non-food consumption expenditure is also rising, and the share of food is declining. So Indian consumer is changing, and on the other side, urban consumption demand has remained. It's increased a bit in the third quarter, but again, it's showing mixed signals. Again, in December, there is some decline in some of the indicators, and most importantly, consumer sentiment has taken a hit
Yes.
because of persistently high food inflation and high taxes, which have squeeze the discretionary spending of urban households. There was a recent survey which says that 1 in 5 household only expects an increase in income in 2025.
Right.
So all these factors are giving us a picture that while rural consumption is now picking up, it is it's increasing in consumption, but urban consumption is showing slack. It was in last year, and it's the slack in urban consumption continues, and so all these numbers do have implications for the policy, for the policy, and what the budget announcement should uh, be in this direction to support consumption.
No, absolutely. And the other thing that the expenditure side of the data shows is the capital formation.
Correct.
Both, I mean, it gives you the gross fixed capital
Right.
formation number,
Yes.
and that is both government and private sector.
Yeah.
So, what does this number show?
So capital formation is expected to grow at 6.4% in this financial year. And again, here we are seeing that both the public capital expenditure and private capital expenditure has not picked up. As I said, central
So
government
neither side has
capex,
picked up.
neither side has picked up. Central government capex, there is We need to analyze the central government capex a bit more in detail. We say that central government capex has declined by 12%, but there are a lot of sectoral variations there. One is that road construction has declined, and there we need to examine the reasons why. Is there a problem with execution? Is there a problem with payment? Is there a problem with monitoring? What is holding back?
Maybe even flooding, monsoon, that kind of
Yes,
thing.
so that
Yeah.
is one. On the other side, railways have performed well in terms of capex spending. It's
Right.
just that it's just like 1% decline from the April to November period of last year. So we need to see the defense again has not done well. So we need to understand what is holding back central government capex, because in July, September, and again in October, November, overall April to November period is lower as compared to 12% lower as compared to the previous year. And that is true also for when we talk about private investment. We look at various data, though there are some sectors where we are seeing some tractions in terms of renewable energy. There are some big project announcements being made, but if we look at overall new projects that are announced, particularly in the December quarter, there is a 22% decline as compared to October December quarter of last year.
Okay.
So, in terms of absolute numbers, rupees 6 lakh crore of new projects were announced in the December quarter, and in the December quarter of last year, it was 7.7 lakh crore. So, there is a decline there. So, private investment still needs to pick up, and a large part of it has to do with consumption. If there is uncertainty, uneven growth in consumption, it is unlikely that private investment will pick up. And this time around, the capex, government capex, which has been the main driver, has also slumped due to a variety of reasons: execution, administrative, the absorption capacity, and so on. So while consumption is expected to pick up, and we can debate about whether the numbers are optimistic or not, but in investment, even the numbers are showing a slowdown.
Right. This is all very worrying, what
Yeah.
you're telling us. But we have a few questions from the audience. So Sankalp asks, he says that government tax policies, particularly capital gains, are under heavy fire amidst the economic slump. Of course, I wish for a lower tax invoice, but would that be enough? We conveniently forget that only 5 years ago, corporate taxes were lowered. The current tax slabs are also lower than in the past, and even exports are at an all time high. During worse tax regimes, we were posting 8% growth. Then, how come this sensible economics is failing us today? Do you have any sincere policy recommendations, or is this simply a phase that we must wait out?
So see, there are two things. One is that from pandemic onwards, the growth that we saw, and the growth that we saw last year, 8.2% growth, a large part of it was driven by government capex, which did not perform well in this financial year as per the available data till now. And if we look at consumption, again, as I said, that there is an uneven growth in consumption. Earlier, the skewness of consumption was in the sense that rural was not doing well and urban was doing well.
Correct.
And now the skewness is in favor of rural consumers, that they are doing well and urban consumers are not doing well. And as you have also talked about in your video, that there is a need to redefine the
The
middle
middle
class.
class,
So
right?
all that thing, because there is a very heavy tax burden in terms of both direct taxes and indirect taxes, and that leaves very little for discretionary spending, and that has implications for employment generation in other sectors and so on. So now the need of the hour is that we have done we have done enough, or we are doing for rural households in terms of income support, a lot of policy measures, and that is showing up in the data, the government data on consumption expenditure survey, that the gap is narrowing and rural consumption is rising. The composition of consumption is getting better for the rural household. So it's
Yeah.
time now to do some support measures in terms of tax cuts to boost consumption for the urban household, the lower middle
Absolutely.
income, so that there is a boost in consumption that would spur consumption and then boost employment and improve the consumer sentiment. months.
And in general, I mean, companies will start investing
Yeah.
and all of that, but first demand needs to pick
Demand
up.
needs to pick up, otherwise capacity utilization is not going to increase further. It'll
Correct.
keep stable at around 74% that we are seeing as of now.
And we've been seeing this 74, 75% for about 8, 9 quarters
Quarters
now.
now,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah.
So, okay, so our second question is from Aditya. Do you think with the low growth rate estimated this year, does the government have the bandwidth with respect to providing tax relief to the taxpayers, as you were asked
Yes,
saying?
so that is important because, as I said, our nominal GDP growth, which is again a very important metric in our fiscal consolidation calculation, what the budget had projected for this financial year was 10.5%.
Mhm.
What the advance estimates project is 9.7%, which is much lower.
Right.
So, in ideal scenario, in ordinary course of things, a lower nominal GDP growth would have posed challenges in the way of fiscal consolidation,
Right.
because then you would have to lower your absolute measure of fiscal deficit so that you achieve the fiscal deficit to GDP ratio. But this time around, since our spending has been, capital expenditure has been quite subdued, and it is expected to miss the target that was envisaged in the budget, so we don't see the impact of a slower nominal GDP growth posing much of a challenge for the overall fiscal consolidation.
But
So
this is clearly not a healthy place for us to
not
be, where your nominal GDP is smaller and your capex is smaller,
absolutely,
and
and
that's how
then
your fiscal deficit
that's
is
how you
low.
are achieving fiscal
Right?
consolidation.
Yeah.
But even that is questionable because if you look at tax revenues, they haven't performed as well as what we saw in the last year. So as a
Hmm.
percent of budget expenditure, budgeted estimate, till now, the net tax collections are lower in April to November as compared to what they were in the previous year. So that could lead to some deviation from fiscal consolidation. But having said that, fiscal consolidation is still okay. We will be, if not 4.9, we will be 5 or something. But what is more important as of now is to provide some measures to prioritize the consumption boosting measures as well as
Absolutely.
employment generation, because clearly this is not something that can be sustained over the long run, that we are having a slowdown in consumption, and that is leading to a slowdown in private investment, and capital expenditure by the government is not picking up materially. So unless all the engines are firing, we will not see a sustained growth, and at the moment it means that we need to prioritize boosting consumption.
Absolutely. So there you go. I mean, that kind of sums it up. But in short, the growth numbers that even the government is estimating, they're not looking good for this financial year. And it's not just the headline numbers, but key sectors like manufacturing, construction, a lot of services sectors, especially the ones that have to deal with services to the public. A lot of those are expected to be slower this year than in last year, and the agriculture sector is expected to do well, which is great news. But apart from that, the data shows that private final consumption expenditure, which is the consumption that the public is doing, that is expected to grow quicker. But again, there's a skew where it's the rural India that is seeing better consumption metrics. Urban India is starting; it has been slowing, and it is expected to continue to slow for the rest of this financial year, which is not good news. So all of these are important because the budget is going to come up on 1st Feb, and this gives some indications for the government what they need to prioritize. Is it tax cuts to boost consumption, or is it something else? Do they again need to make the capex push of the government much stronger? All of these things are things to think about. But on that note, that's all from us. Thank you so much for watching.